It's difficult to imagine how ancient people were able to assemble this massive monument, but they managed to do so. Irish archaeologists finally reached the asterisk other side of the stone door at the Giant's Causeway. In the second, the camera cleared the rock face. The man holding the controls stopped breathing. He had drilled through 12 meters of 60-million-year-old basalt to get there. He expected a void, a pocket, a hollow left over from cooling lava. What the lens found instead was a corridor, straight, structured, and reinforced from the inside. Inside, there are carved stones. And then you come into a chamber which is quite roomy. And before he could even process what he was looking at, something deeper in the dark lit up on its own. He never went back. The man at the cliff face. His name is Kieran O'Hara, former field archaeologist, years on subsurface, surveys up and down the Irish coast before he walked away from institutional work entirely. The colleagues who knew him used the same word every time: cautious to a fault. He didn't write speculative blog posts. He didn't push pet theories at conferences after the bar opened. Nobody who worked alongside him for a decade ever heard him say anything stronger than the data suggests. So, when he drove out to the Giant's Causeway alone, before sunrise with a heavy-duty rotary hammer in the back of his car and no permits in his pocket, that was already a man behaving completely out of character. Here is the catch. He says he wasn't part of any official investigation into the so-called moving stone door at the Causeway because no official investigation existed. There was only footage, tourists with phones. Look, trust rangers, describing what they thought they saw to colleagues over coffee. Short clips passed quietly between researchers who didn't want their names attached to any of it. The clips never made it onto any geological journal's desk. They were forwarded, reviewed in private, and shelved. Most of them were dismissed inside a week. Basalt formations don't open. They fracture. They collapse. They do not slide cleanly aside. But the footage showed exactly that. And while everyone else stared at the motion, O'Leary stared at the edge of the door. He watched the same 15-second clip on repeat for a week. Video footage was caught on camera. And you seen from that? Fantastic footage. The door opening. Here. Then he pulled an ordnance survey map of the Causeway coast off the shelf. Above his desk, marked the section of cliff in question, and started reading it the way a forensic accountant reads a balance sheet, looking for the thing somebody had tried to hide. That detail is what brought him to the cliff face that morning, and what he found in the rock around it is what made him stop. Calling this a survey, what the edge was, hiding. Think about what basalt is supposed to do. As lava cools, it contracts. It splits into the columnar structures that made the Causeway famous in the first place. Those tall hexagonal stone fingers tourists climb across every summer. The fractures look geometric from a distance, but at the greater than microscopic level, they are messy. Stress lines never run clean. Any displacement, natural or man-made, leaves a signature. Crumbled edges, displaced grit, microfractures, spidering out into the surrounding stone. Even an earthquake doesn't move. Greater than basalt cleanly. It tears it. The footage of the moving door had none of that. No debris. Greater than. No dust, no visible seam. Just a controlled shift, then stillness, like a vault sealing itself back into the cliff. That detail is his hooked him. Not the spectacle, the cleanliness. Because clean does not happen in volcanic rock. Clean implies tolerance. Tolerance implies machining. Machining implies somebody at some point decided exactly how much room a moving piece of basalt was allowed to have. That is not a thing geology does. So, he parked away from the visitor center, walked in along the cliff path before the first tour groups arrived, and chose his entry point not at the door itself. That would have been the obvious play, and it would have failed, but offset, close enough that any internal structure running parallel to the door would intersect his bore line. He set the Hilti TE-70. He fitted the 40mm carbide-tipped masonry bit extended through couplings that gave him reach without widening the entry point. His hands were steady. His breathing was slow. He had spent hours that morning mapping the rock face by touch alone, tracing texture shifts and faint changes in coloration. None of it was proof. All of it was suggestion. Whenever you were younger, you were told they were formed by a massive giant who had put all these rocks together. But whenever you find out the real story, I think personally that is one of the most exciting parts of Northern Ireland's geology. There is an art to reading basalt that nobody teaches in a university classroom. You have to spend years with the stone to know what it is, telling you where the cooling stress lines flow, where the columns interlock, and where they only pretend to, where the rock is dense, and where, against every expectation, it is hollow. Oria had those years. He pressed his palm flat against this cliff face and closed his eyes for a long moment before he chose his spot. Whatever the rock was telling him, he wanted to be sure he was hearing it correctly. He picked his spot. Greater than. He pressed the trigger, and whatever was waiting on the other side of the cliff was about to stop being hidden. The breakthrough. The layer behaves exactly the way basalt is supposed to behave. Dense, unyielding, predictable. The dust expelling from the bore matches the fine dark particulate basalt produces under stress. No cavities. No. Greater than. Fractures. No anomalies in the feedback at all. This phenomena created the Giant's Causeway 60 million years ago. Greater than. It's a process that is still occurring. Anyone who has drilled basalt for a living can tell within the first 30 seconds whether the rock is going to surprise them. This rock is not surprising him. He keeps going, slow, measured, adjusting angle, compensating for heat buildup in the bit. The cliff face is cold against his shoulder. The wind off the Atlantic has dropped. Somewhere far below, the tide is turning against the lower causeway. Stones, that low hollow knock of water, meeting basalt that has been the soundtrack of this coastline for 60 million years. Minutes pass. The hole deepens. Nothing changes until everything changes. There is no warning. Greater than. No softening of resistance. No shift in pitch. One moment the drill is cutting through solid stone. The next, it isn't. The force required to maintain forward motion vanishes so abruptly the drill advances 3 in before he can release the trigger. The vibration through the housing changes character entirely from dense grinding feedback to something hollow, open, empty. He kills the power and holds position for several seconds. He doesn't move. He doesn't breathe. He listens. Greater than. No air rushes out. No echo. No movement on the other side of the breach. Whatever space he has just punched through to is inventing to the outside. It is sealed, contained. Greater than, and the silence coming back at him through that hole is not the silence of an empty cavity. It is the silence of a space that has been quiet for a very long time and does not want to be disturbed. He pulls the drill back just enough to confirm the breakthrough. No debris surge, no collapse, no secondary fracture, just a clean transition from solid basalt to nothing. He sets the hilty down on the ground beside him. His hands are still steady, but his pulse is somewhere it shouldn't be. He can feel it in his throat, a tight, fast rhythm that has nothing to do with the physical exertion of the last 40 minutes. He is, by his own admission later, terrified. Not of the drilling, not of being caught, of what he has just opened. And here is the thing he doesn't know yet. He hasn't seen what is in there. He won't see it for another 12 minutes while he sets up the camera unit. So, if you are still with me at this point, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because what comes out of that hole when he sends the camera in is the part most channels will not show you, and we are going to walk through every frame of it together. Right now, all he knows is this. The void on the other side of his bore is not empty. He can feel it. He just doesn't know what filled it. The first 5 meters, he doesn't widen the hole right away. He waits, holds a strip of fine paper against the opening. Nothing moves. The air on the other side is stagnant, undisturbed, which already rules out most of the natural explanations he walked in prepared to find. Lava tubes vent, fault cavities echo, sealed natural voids in basalt. This hole don't stay structurally intact for 60 million years. This one has. Let that sink in. The walls of whatever is in there are holding under their own weight 60 million years after the body rock around them cooled, and not a single column of basalt above it has slumped down to fill the gap. Sealed natural cavities don't behave like that. Engineered ones do. Only then does he start widening the entry. Not enough to climb through. He isn't going in after it himself. The unit he feeds through is a small tract inspection crawler, the kind used for sewer surveys, modified with a brighter LED ring and a hardened tether running back to a handheld monitor. He pushes it forward through the bore. He watches it clear the owl's back wall. He waits for the camera to stabilize, and then he sees the floor. The space on the other side isn't a pocket. It is a corridor. The floor extends forward in a straight line. The walls hold a roughly consistent width. The ceiling, which on raw basalt should be jagged, fractured, uneven, is instead unsettlingly level. Not polished, but level the way a surface becomes when something cared about how level it was. There is a difference between a cave that happens to be flat and a space that has been kept flat. This is the second kind. His grip tightens on the monitor. He has been bracing it against his stomach. The crawler keeps rolling. 5 meters inches. 8. That's when the hanging shapes come into view. He stops the crawler. He does not narrate. He does not breathe. The title told you the other side of the door would not be empty. The first 5 meters proved it. The next 5 made it worse. On the coast of Northern Ireland, pillars of stone thrust up from the earth in shapes so perfect they seem impossible. This is the Giant's Causeway. The hanging shapes. The forms are dark, suspended, regularly spaced. They distort the light strangely, absorbing more of it than the surrounding rock should. They don't shine. They don't reflect. They drink. The floor beneath them is darker than the basalt at the entry point, stained, uneven. Shallow pools of liquid scatter the crawler's beam into broken reflections that ripple slightly, even when the crawler itself is sitting still. The crawler counts 7 of them in the first cluster, then more deeper in, harder to make out through the haze. The spacing between them never varies. Whatever they are, somebody hung them carefully. This is as far as the public version of the footage goes before he cuts away. The full uncut recording is in the pinned comment, and the frame-by-frame breakdown is in our unseen archive on Patreon. Link below. What you are seeing here has already been edited, not for clarity, but for what stays in frame long enough to be clearly seen. When the recording resumes, the crawler is past the suspended cluster. The atmosphere has thickened, edges soften, contrast drops. Moisture is suspended in the air, dense enough to confuse the camera's sense of depth, and then the floor changes. The surface darkens in patches. The tracks compress a thin layer of something softer than rock, water probably, or something close to it. Shallow pooling appears in the low spots, thin, uneven layers reflecting the lights in fractured, broken patterns. The reflections never form clean mirror images. They ripple even when the crawler is stationary. Either the liquid isn't still or the surface beneath it isn't. Oryx slows the crawler. The camera angle dips toward the ground. There is no flow direction, no visible source. The color is hard to define on camera. Dark, almost black under direct light. But when the angle shifts, faint variations bleed through, tones that don't match the surrounding basalt, suggesting it isn't only water sitting on stone. He doesn't sample it. He didn't bring anything that could safely contain whatever it might turn out to be. His hand is shaking on the controls. He realizes it only when he tries to make a fine adjustment and the crawler veers wider than he meant. He sets the monitor down for a second, presses his palm flat against the cold cliffstone behind him, and waits for it to steady. Then he tilts the camera up. Now understand why he never went in himself. The embedded beams, it would be easy to miss. The light catches something across the ceiling that doesn't match the surrounding texture. Something linear cutting straight across the natural flow of the rock. The lens steadies. The pattern resolves. There are structures embedded in the ceiling, not protruding, not hanging, integrated, running horizontally across the cavity, intersecting the rock above at regular measured intervals. They resemble beams, partially obscured by the surrounding material, but distinct enough to break the continuity of the basalt completely. They don't follow organic fracture lines. They cut across them, holding straight paths where the rock itself would normally curve or break. Reinforcement, or something behaving like it. Here is where it gets bad. The basalt at the Giant's Causeway is 60 million years old. Whatever those beams are made of, the basalt formed around them, not the other way around. Read that again. Whatever those beams are made of was already there when the lava cooled 60 million years ago, before mammals diversified. Before the Atlantic Ocean as we know it had finished forming. Something put structural reinforcement into a corridor at the Giant's Causeway, and then the entire North Antrim coastline cooled around it, and it is still holding. The spacing between them matches almost exactly the spacing of the suspended forms. Whatever is hanging from the ceiling and whatever is holding the ceiling up are part of the same system. They are not two phenomena. They are one. Oria leans away from the monitor. He looks up the cliff face at the basalt columns rising above him, at the sky just starting to lighten toward dawn over the Atlantic. The most photographed natural landmark in Northern Ireland is sitting on top of something that is not natural. He has known this intellectually for the last 3 minutes. It is only now starting to land. The title told you the other side of that door wasn't empty. By this point, not empty doesn't even cover it anymore. The space is occupied. The space is engineered. The space has been engineered for longer than the human species has existed. And then, at 15 meters, something inside it lights up on its own. The flare. At 15 meters, the crawler keeps moving. 10 meters from entry. 12, 15. The signal stays mostly stable, but not perfectly. Brief flickers, small bursts of interference that ripple through the feed and clear before he has to react. The bursts are increasing in frequency, and they don't match any electromagnetic profile he is familiar with from working in deep basalt before. Basalt is electromagnetically quiet. It does not generate this kind of static. Something inside that cavity is producing it. He doesn't know what. He doesn't know how. He only knows the pattern is rising, and the closer the crawler pushes, the worse it gets. Then it happens fast. So fast it is easy to miss on a single viewing. A flare of light, brighter than the crawler's own LED, blooms in the frame ahead. The flare reflects off the moisture in the air, creating a momentary glow across the lens. Then, it is gone. No source, no residual brightness, nothing. He pauses the crawler, holds position, waits. The space ahead remains dark. He scrubs back through the feed, isolating the frames where the flare appears. It is there, consistent across multiple frames. Not a glitch, not a reflection from the crawler's own lights bouncing off a surface he can't see. The geometry is wrong for that. The brightness rises and falls in a pattern the crawler's beams could not have produced. The crawler was sitting still. Something external, something inside the cavity, something that produced its own light briefly and then stopped. His thumb hovers over the controls. He does not push the crawler forward, not for a long moment. Whatever just signaled, and he is using that word now in his head, signaled, was responding to the crawler's presence. He has no way to confirm that. He also has no way to rule it out. He plays the flare back one more time, then a third. The brightness builds, holds, drops, builds, holds, drops, almost rhythmic, almost deliberate. The kind of sequence you would design if you wanted something to register as a signal and not as a malfunction. He is aware that he is reading too much into it. He is also aware that he has been doing this kind of work long enough to trust his pattern recognition. Both things are true at once. He sits with that for a moment on the cold cliff face at the Giant's Causeway, with a monitor in his lap showing him a corridor that nobody officially knows exists. Static flickers across the feed. The image distorts, stabilizes, distorts again. The further he pushes, the less stable everything becomes. 20 meters from entry. That is where it stops, not by his choice. The crawler loses traction on the soft surface. The tracks spin without gaining ground. The signal interference reaches a level where he risks losing the feed entirely. He attempts minor adjustments. None of them help. So, he makes the decision the way every cautious operator makes that decision. He pulls it back. But what passes the lens on the way out is the part that kept him awake for weeks afterward. The retreat. The crawler retraces its path slowly. Same darkened floor. Same embedded ceiling beams overhead, still cutting their unnatural straight lines across the natural rock. Watching the playback later, he times the gaps between them. They never vary, not by a single frame. Whatever set the spacing in that ceiling did it once, perfectly, and then walked away. Or didn't walk away, and then the suspended forms reappear hanging unchanged, except not completely. Subtle inconsistencies in their positions, barely perceptible. Nothing he could prove on a single frame, but enough that watching the footage forward and then watching it back, he is no longer certain those shapes were in exactly the same place when the crawler passed beneath them the first time. The angles are off by fractions of a degree. The shadows don't fall quite where they fell on the way in. One of them is hanging at a slightly different rotation. Another has shifted maybe a centimeter, maybe less, along its long axis. Small things. The kind of small things you can talk yourself out of seeing if you watch the footage only once. He has watched it more than once. He doesn't say they moved. He says he can't be sure they didn't. The title promised the other side of that door wouldn't be empty. By now you understand the worst part of that promise. Not empty doesn't only mean the corridor is full of things. It means the things in the corridor may not have been waiting. They may have been watching. The crawler clears the corridor. Light from the outside bleeds into the frame as the unit approaches the exit bore. It pushes through back into the open air on the cliff face. The operation ends there. He doesn't reinsert the crawler. He doesn't attempt a second pass. He removes his equipment, packs it down, and seals the entry point. Not permanently, but cleanly enough that from the outside the rock face appears untouched. No fracture lines, no residual debris, no evidence that any drilling has ever taken place. He works fast. He keeps glancing at the sealed bore the way you would glance at a door you weren't certain you had locked behind you. From the cliff path the next morning, you would walk past it without noticing anything. Tourists did. They have been walking past it ever since. What he will not say. The stone door, the one that started all of this, the one tourists and rangers reported watching slide open, has not been recorded opening again since. Oh, well, this is exciting. Earlier today, we're being told tourists and National Trust rangers saw the legendary fin disappear into a magical doorway within the rock face here at the Giant's Causeway. No further movement, no additional footage, nothing. Whatever schedule it was operating on has not repeated. Whether that means it is finished, or whether it means it is waiting for something, depends entirely on what you think is on the other side of it. But if the cavity Aurelia reached runs parallel to that section of cliff, and if the structure Aurelia found exists alongside the one observed from the outside, then the implication is unavoidable. Whatever is behind that door isn't empty. It isn't a hollow. It isn't a natural void carved out by cooling lava or millennia of water seepage. It is structured, deliberate, concealed inside solid volcanic rock with a level of care that suggests whoever built it did not want it found. There is no official record of any of this. No documentation filed with the National Trust. No published findings. Only one account from one man who mapped a cliff face by hand, drilled through its thinnest section, and pushed a camera into the darkness on the other side. Every other expert who has been asked about the moving door footage has either declined to comment or reinstated the standard geological position that basalt formations do not move, and therefore the footage must be misidentified, edited, or both. Aurea does not seem to disagree that basalt does not move. He simply thinks that whatever moved at the Giant's Causeway was not technically basalt, or at least not only basalt. He was careful in how he described what he saw, measured, precise, but on one point he never hesitated, never softened, never qualified. He never called it natural. The footage doesn't show everything that was in there. It can't. The lens distorts. The moisture interferes. Depth is compressed. The recording is, in his own words, clearer than what he saw in real time, which means whatever the camera failed to capture, his eyes failed to catch first. There was something in that cavity it wasn't supposed to be, and it produced its own light when the crawler got close. So, if that stone door opens again, if the mechanism that allowed it to slide aside the first time activates a second time, the question is no longer what is going to be revealed when it opens. The question is what is already waiting on the other side. Drop a comment below. And do you think Aurea should release the rest of the footage? Or did he do the right thing sealing it back up? Hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because if that door opens again, we'll be the first to tell you. The full uncut recording is in the pinned comment. Kieran Aurea sealed his entry point and walked away. He hasn't been back to the Causeway since the day he sealed the board. He won't say why. He won't even discuss it on the phone. The only thing he will confirm on record is that whatever is in there is still in there. Whatever was in there did not.